this computer. So this session of XORG is now about playtesting the case university. So taking some of the learnings from a couple of earlier sessions of analyzing the organization that is university at large and what kind of things it contains, and turning the view into more ground level. But to get there, let's have a little bit of a recap, or maybe summaries, or kind of condensation, and it might be a good word to get somewhere. So, like, I was thinking, like, maybe like Pablo, would you like to summarize, or would you could do that, because
yeah, I think I can do that.
Yeah.
So we decided to take on the university case from the OBOK games perspective, which seemed to be quite productive because there's many systems inside of university that are very much mappable, like easily mappable to the system we've developed. And there's particularly like oppressive systems that are things like grades that are like particularly toxic, I would say, that allow for thorough analysis of what's going on there. We also speculated on the possibility of using inventories as a game mechanic that might prove useful. We talked about students as characters, roles being important in that sense, access to inventory, access to rooms. There's like a lot of things to go into. And we finally talked about distributed university, that we sort of, I guess you went into that on the last session that I missed. I started watching the recording but did not finish.
That's okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess that's where we are at. Maybe the university is a bit too huge, so I guess that's why you propose to go deeper into a particular case, into a particular scene.
Yeah. Or kind of playing around with the idea, but not the whole necessary, but kind of playing it in snapshots in a way. And I think that's a good summary. Like, there were many ideas. There was the inventory. There was like looking at the different kind of paradigms of like, for example, how to replace or reconceive what has been credit, and maybe do away with it altogether or redefine it. And there's a lot to talk about that. I think there were some good ideas towards kind of crafting a paradigm, etc. And then there, like talking about the sort of distributed existence, there were many good ideas there as well. But we can visit them later, or maybe they raise up as kind of topics. But I have a couple of like maybe condensations, which are kind of like topics to raise from this, let's say, learnings.
Just a quick question. Sorry.
Sure.
Before
Go ahead.
The idea was to analyze the university.
Yeah, that's where we started.
Mechanics, not kind of to develop projects, to speculate on other learning or like research, whatever, or organizations.
Yeah, kind of the starting point was like to kind of analyze them in the way like, well, game mechanics help in terms of breaking them down into parts. It wasn't any kind of like has to be game mechanics or shut up kind of a thing. But the main point was to look at like what kind of elements does a university offer to conceive its organization as a game, and also how could you compose a game from it. Where would you start? Like these questions of credit, etc.
How could you compose a university as a game? Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a it's a kind of transposition of some sort.
Yes.
like the yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did mention that we might sort of like expand the notion of university into learning environments,
Yes.
as university might prove restrictive in some ways to just remain there. And we did mention that might be useful for you, Martin, in the context of the residency you're working
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. Yeah, for me it
Yeah.
would be very interesting indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, university is also such a kind of specific and kind of already formatted. We have such a well-defined notion of a university, so that's why maybe I sense this kind of lack of mobility, maybe conceptually.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, do say, Pablo.
Yeah, that I even have had this urge this past week of maybe how to say, like, revisit this book by Ivan Illich, maybe you know it, of descolarizing. I don't remember the name in English. Deschooling. That might be useful, to like maybe make these concepts, instrumentalize them in the OBOK sense, and see how they would perform in this context. I think that would be interesting. Even also Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed, like those kinds of things, how would they adapt, like as weapons against the final boss that is the university as the learning environment.
Yeah, like for me, like the university was like very loose, or kind of like to be taken apart anyway. Like it was like a good, like a road sign. Like, okay, here's where to start walking, because it's also like even though it has a defined form, it has a huge history, like down to the Greek academies and so on. Like and there's many forms that it has kind of gone through. So there's a lot to play, but it definitely, the idea was not to be strictly doing university as it is, but more like it's like a good condensed point where to start to break this down. But like I think practically one could say it's ultimately about any school, and really about the concept of learning, teaching in general. Um, like, and university serves just as a starting point for that. So yeah, and in some ways, I think that's still present, if even for towards this sort of playtesting directions, because I think that well, especially the idea of teaching, learning, and how to reconceive those might be like big topics here, or central topics. So, but a couple of things I wanted to say, like as a kind of pre caution towards the playtesting. So I had a good talk with actually Thea, because we were talking also in terms of another project, but we visited this topic, and one of the things I kind of talked with her was like kind of art of learning. This was an art related project, and kind of what it would mean if such a thing would exist, because it doesn't really, kind of, but it doesn't, art doesn't really acknowledge it as an existing form. And this came to this sort of like opening up, first of all, what's learning, and um, and then that led to many good ideas. Like also afterwards, I was thinking like to how to make it playful. I'll just give anecdotes because they will be kind of affecting this game mechanics or game approaches that will come. Like one of them was like I took other words to replace learning and teaching. Um, so, for example, if I take the concept of infecting, and if rather than me teaching, I'm actually infecting, how would I work as a teacher? And this kind of quite quickly led to this idea that I have some piece that is the infector, like a framing, maybe it's a phrase, maybe it's a movement, maybe it's something else. And then I find a way to kind of transfer or give or offer, or maybe it's expose that person to this piece, the infector, But then afterwards, it would be actually kind of meeting them again and seeing how the infection spreads, like how it has changed. Is natural for infections. It's not quite the same as the infector. It's actually something different. And also how it has spread. Like, oh, it's also now appearing in other areas of my activity and my thinking, or both. And so, well, it's a type of exercise I often do because it makes you quite quickly change perspective, but brings up something useful in terms of reconceiving what teaching can be. And then I had like polluting, and I imagined a teacher that throws a lot of stuff at you and kind of discordant stuff, and you have to kind of organize it because it's polluting your space. And that becomes yet another teaching. And I had scratching, and I had corroding, and so on. Like, I didn't go through all of them, but I have about 20 of those. And there could of course be others, but that was for me like opening this playfulness and kind of like shaking up what teaching and learning is. Rather than me learning, I'm actually being infected. But it's about me following the infection and how it mutates and how it spreads. Like it just covers the similar area, but it's different. That's one. And then the second one, which was kind of funny from the kind of conversation, was kind of tongue-in-cheek. I threw in Mega Dungeon University. Now, Mega Dungeon is actually a concept. Might not sound that, but it is. It's a game concept. So really shortly, like dungeon, you might know, it's like you can, like this labyrinthine maps with rooms with encounters, challenges, puzzles, etc. I'm intentionally raising the puzzles and challenges to already get close. But then the Mega Dungeon is this. Well, there are different visions. Sometimes it's just large, but like lately it has been this sort of like potentially infinite, like not mapped, not like you don't know where it ends. You're in essentially an endless labyrinth, but the labyrinth consists of this sort of rooms that you encounter. Maybe you discover a new area and you don't know where it is, and so on. And then the idea was like, if people share these mega dungeons, why not create such a university? And what if the teacher would be like the games master? And so they are not quite the teacher, but they're kind of they're facilitating the situation. And what if the whole thing is mostly theater of the mind, like you're really kind of being in this place, and then the rooms are kind of like, yes, there are challenges, but then you are already very close to teaching, and but then there are connections and corridors between the things, and you can do something with the corridors. And then, even though it was a tongue-in-cheek idea, as we talked about it, it kind of appeared more and more interesting as kind of a possibility, and wacky enough to be interesting, like that you could have a university like Harvard, but it's a mega dungeon. And how do you go there is by playing, and how do you get it alive is running a session there. So those were two anecdotes. Like, of course, like any comments, questions on those. After that, we can sort of more dive in. But they're getting us closer, because I'm kind of thinking towards that direction with this playtest.
Yeah, I like the idea of dungeon because it has like, I don't know if all dungeons have it, maybe you know, Pekko, but they have this characteristic of having one entering moment and one exiting moment, right? Like there's one entrance and one exit, and you're supposed to go through it. Inside of it, you can take different paths, but sort of like the goal is to get out of the dungeon, right? Which is something that I feel sometimes universities have. Like there's this forward motion towards graduating, towards finishing and leaving, and not towards just being there as a continuous process, right? Like there's this goal-oriented notion of it. So I guess that's useful to think through. And another thing, maybe stepping back into the general, but 2 sessions ago, you this was really profound for me, but you framed learning as transformation, as a factor
Yeah.
of change, right?
Yeah,
And
we'll
that,
come to that also. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that was really revealing to me, especially in terms of evaluation, right? How evaluation should aim towards measuring this factor of change, like the delta, right?
Yeah.
Where you started and where you ended. And there's also like this direction and intensity in transformation. So yeah, that was just something I wanted to add. That's it.
Yeah, like learning as ultimately a form of changing. Like that, it's in some ways it's more specific, but actually it's benefits to think about it in this larger sense of just changing, and that you are changing when you're learning. That's a condition that is certainly present in all learning, and so that for me is still rather interesting. But we'll come to that. Any comments, Martin, on those?
Just something that hits my head right now is maybe kind of encapsulated in what Pablo just said about this kind of forward motion of the university. I mean, that's also the thing that kind of strikes me there is this kind of idea of the graduation or the title, you know, which I find is one of the more problematic
Yes.
parts. And but I don't know what I mean to say with that. It just crossed me. Because I'm trying to understand at the same time, having missed the last couple of sessions, now what is it exactly that you're doing? So because like I understand that we're kind of approaching the idea of observing whatever it is that you're describing through this play, like through this game mechanics. But on the way of that, you're also undertaking a couple of conceptual operations, which I try to read at this moment as still being prior to the game testing thing. So I'm just a bit kind of seeking to navigate what are you doing, or what have you been doing?
Yeah, in terms of the graduation, like there was actually a good talk quite at the beginning and quite maybe good analysis as well, like how universities are kind of essentially organized around the logic of credit, that they gain somehow this power of giving credit, and the graduation is just a kind of top of the cake of that. But everything in university, like there's other ways to think about it, but it's certainly a kind of valid way of thinking how it really cascades from this fact that it has this authority to give credit, and then we kind of processed around that, and I think opening from there, like what if you kind of move the focus from the credit, because it's anyway the hardest thing to get if you would kind of create a game like university or university as a game. The credit is something that is very societal in like gaining that. So because it allows you to think about the organization of the university rather differently. Like they often diligently follow this credit. It's every course. The fact that there are these tests which creates output, which is often kind of wasteful, that nobody wants to read them afterwards. But it's all to the worshipping the logic of the credit. But yeah, but from there, the kind of let's say the playable ideas. So I first started from this idea, like maybe kind of like a stripped down version of this sort of mega dungeon university idea. That, of course, if there was a highly distributed game of university, it would be good that there is a way to share, like easily pop it up, but also share the existence of that, and maybe even kind of hopefully playfully create relations with the parts, which is the interesting, or not the only, but one of the interesting parts about the Mega Dungeon University. Like, you know, if you had this sort of shared dungeon, a map somewhere in the web, and people would pop up different areas. By the way, that's different in Mega Dungeons. They don't necessarily have one entrance. That's actually one of the interesting parts, that they often play that there could always be new entrances, and there are often many. and not necessarily exit at all. Or the interest is to exit rather. So it's not going through at all. Like it's more like going deeper. It's very much in this underworld. It's very much an allegory of the underworld, or kind of playable allegory of the underworld. So yeah, so it kind of fits here. But like from here, like these qualities that you would have this sort of like here's a session, but it's somehow part of a larger whole. And that came to me like, okay, first of all, like there's something interesting in this palette, or the idea of a room in this game, which is a challenge. Like the players or the characters come to a room, and there is like a something that they don't quite know. It might be an encounter with another living entity, but it also might be just a room, and then it in itself is a challenge of learning what's in the room and understanding it. But then like another room is another modular unit. And this is interesting because now we are super close to kind of ideas of learning, because it's a challenge, it's about kind of understanding it, etc., and so on. So but to strip it down, I thought about, what if we start from like a scene as a concept, like the OBOK, the game structures we have been looking at, well, of course, room is a scene, and scene can be a room, but like as a basic point. And what if the idea is like playing a scene? What if anybody can start this playing? The playing, of course, can be this sort of theater of the mind, like imagining a space, but doesn't necessarily have to be. But also, there doesn't really have to be anything fitting an idea of a teacher. That is, you can simply face the puzzle. And I have an example, and maybe that now helps us to get to a play situation, because it's kind of an example of how we could create such a situation for us, and that would finally get us to more playtesting. But so, as a test, I created a completely made up school of thought, which was boringly conceptual, because that's kind of how I think. But it was this idea of chimerics. And chimerics was that if there was this sort of normal habit of like making combinations of two concepts. Of course, we have portmanteau words and we compound words and whatnot, but like really like two things that become one thing in a more insistent way. Like you can take like family and operation, but then you would use it like one concept, like how operation would have family. Like, well, maybe it's like one operation and another operation which is kind of related to that, and the third operation which is almost like a crossbreed of those ones, and this could be your chimeric of the family and operation. So yes, close to some things, but the point was to not to exist. So I created scenes. Like one was the scene that you're like, you find yourself in the middle of the scene. It's not necessarily that you're walking through a tunnel and everything starts from some beginning, but it's simply a scene that you have to explain chimerics to someone. Like then they make a particular question, so it's a playable situation, and you might not know anything about it before then, maybe the beginnings of it, but then you explain it, and that becomes like a way to solve the challenge of the scene. The next one is like you create three, or create maybe just one of these chimerics, and then you kind of apply it and make some scene that reflects this quality, and so on. But the idea here was that once you go through the scenes, like you go through a dungeon, you are sort of learning, or you're kind of like, the litmus test was that, do you have an idea of these chimerics that didn't exist after you go through the scenes? And do those scenes actually populate in your mind the idea? And this is why I wanted to test with an empty ground, so to speak. um, and um, and and that you could potentially use the scenes like if somebody's playing the person who asks you the description, they ask follow-up questions and maybe they're angry at you, you can be playful with it. Can you do things with those? And I think that was all actually rather interesting. Um, hopefully there's something interesting for you as well. But then it also like uh, suggests this possibility of such a scene existing like a place in a dungeon that suddenly like you can go to the course, not really a course, of chimerics by going through the scenes like you go through a dungeon, and and you get completely different results, but that's fine. Like and you can share it with others by sharing the scenes like you would share dungeon rules, like here's how you run the scene. So this is kind of the premise and the kind of idea of the playtesting, to create scenes on a topic that is to be roughly learned in the widest sense possible, maybe probably in a reconceived sense, and playing some of those, and to see whether that is interesting and what one can do with that. I know it might be slightly wacky, but that's kind of the direction I'm pushing the playtesting. But how does it sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we should just try to do one, maybe in a more experimental setup, to finalize our thoughts around it instead of just trying to understand it before doing it.
Yeah. Like I don't think it's like super complicated, and it's kind of understandable, probably through play better. But Martin, how do you feel about
it? Maybe like Pablo, let's like hit it and see what happens.
All right. So to gather the ingredients, we would first come up with, or it's probably easier if we come up with a topic. Like I had this chimerics, but that's probably not first choice of many. But like, what kind of thematic you would like to use for the scenes? What are we learning as?
But you mean like, because I like chimerics or chimeras, or but do you mean choosing another topic, or choosing a topic and analyze it through the perspective of chimerics?
I mean, either or. I would be fine in choosing chimerics as this sort of non-existing but existing in this play world kind of a thing, which we learn by playing it and make it real for us by playing. But I'm just saying, like, if something else comes to mind, either existing or non-existing, I think actually learning non-existing things is a big power here, but that's a whole nother thing.
And so to understand what we're trying to kind of now construct as a playground is like how to learn about this, not how to teach, but how to learn. Or
yeah, they mix and match, but I think it's more learning. I think it's in a way like learning is more fundamental, and in a way like this is the point that I think this can work even without the teacher. That the teacher is the challenge, the scene itself. Like, of course, it can have somebody who knows about it, but I think it's interesting if it's capable of doing this even without the so-called teacher.
so I think chimerics is a good candidate because I don't know much about it. So it's a good thing. I wouldn't have to play learning.
Yeah, like it's a good candidate because nobody really knows about it because it doesn't exist. But yeah, like before this, but yeah, like but I'm actually a big believer in learning non-existent things because you can get good at them quite quickly because like you don't have competition. This is real, right? This is not humor. Okay, so if it be chimerics, which might be like essentially bringing in, say, two concepts, but could be something else, but to make them usable, like we use a concept, it becomes like concept can become an explainer or an operator of something. of course, it can be, one can think of visual solutions. I thought, at least in my solo testing, the scene of explaining it, and once again, we can take this playfully, that really there's no wrong answers. Um, uh, and playing through it is a good scene. So I would, like, even though it's a little bit of a cop-out, I would propose that. So I propose a scene. Maybe I can start, so that helps. So I can be a little bit of a facilitator here. And the scene is this. Okay, let's put it like this. So you have been assigned to a course. You don't know what kind of a course. It's actually up in the air. It's actually up in the air. What does the courses mean in this play world? So you can be very free with that. But you've been assigned to a course of chimerics, and you're in maybe an online bar, like here. Like I'm trying to combine the bar, but maybe I keep the online to keep it a little bit closer to the current situation. And then your friend, like a recent friend, maybe it's from this whatever institution this is, asks you, and I will take the role of the friend. So, what is this chimerics anyway? Like, how would you explain it? You too. You can play yourselves, by the way, like, and you can color those anyways. But like, yeah. So we can press play from there. So this chimerics, what is it? Like, what are you learning?
I,
Start C.
yeah, I would say chimerics is has this characteristic of mixing two things that are not so far away from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've had some conflicts in the class when we work with more dialectic chimerics, because the
Okay.
synthesis does not work if they're too opposing to one another.
Okay.
It's mostly chimerics comes from these animals that actually walk. It's an animal with two heads, so you
Yeah.
need to make some sense of it. Mostly if it's two mammals, it works well. If you have like a lion and a serpent, it might get a bit funky. So you have to find something that is distinct enough to be interesting, but not too far off, so that your chimeric concept can walk.
So it's bad that it's funky. I mean, it sounds, if it's funky, it sounds interesting. Like what kind of funky?
It can be funky as long as it's able to move around.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So it's sort of living. I don't know, Martin. What do you think? Like, is
Well,
that
what I recall from the course was that it is something very personal. I mean, it's like the whole like the contemporary or the kind of extant notion of chimerics, or what it has become, is that it's something that you have to try out on your own body. It's like something that you need to try out on your own body in a way. So like in order to,
on your
it's
own
part of
body?
the yeah, it's part of the process that you would need to kind of that's specific what I kind of collected in the course. That's a specific
As a form of augmentation on your body.
yeah
Like
characteristic.
how do you take it on your body? Like,
oh, you just need to kind of extend, attach,
oh, okay.
change
So
motion path. Like it's a very kind of intrusive operation. It's a very
okay, yeah. So it's your body, and then it's extended by this.
yeah.
I think I got
That's how I misunderstood something in the earlier courses, but that's what I remember. Maybe I slept. Maybe I was dreaming that.
well, maybe we'll see. Sort of a meta moment, meta sign. Like, so one could play these scenes towards, an answer. I've been thinking about, like, because I'm also been thinking about, like, how do you transfer, publish or express these scenes to others? That it would be interesting to have this sort of setup, but then also like, maybe not towards an answer, but like kind of, maybe it could contain like things to play through, like for the players to play it, like for example, that there's an act of explanation. Whatever happens with it, it's not really testing. Did you give the right or good explanation? It's merely getting you to the process of explanation. So in a way, like we could even cut the scene there. Like we could continue it also. And you could build a scene which is like, maybe that's the first question, but then I could ask like, do you have an example of it? If anything comes to mind, you can answer that. It can be.
I grew a piece of my bed on my shin bone the other day.
Oh, interesting. What happened?
Yeah. It was funny because it was just a kind of random carambolage in the beginning, and yeah.
What is a carambolage?
Carambolage? What is it? A collision?
Oh, a collision.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And
okay.
I just decided to have it stuck there.
So yeah, it's like also about how they come together. It's about the kind of relation as well. Like, is it a collision, or do they merge, do they mutate? Okay.
It's kind of, I think that's why it's kind of particular, this kind of serendipitous, connection of a character. And it's more about like catching the Pokemon as you come across it, and then, like it's one way, it's not every way.
So yeah, like you're looking for, and then there's this flash moment that you catch the Pokemon.
Yeah, like, or you kind of know it, that you kind of, you didn't do your chimeric homework or whatever stuff, and then it's a kind of, you keep it in the back of your mind, and suddenly you stick a bit out of your shin, and then it's good.
Yeah.
Probably important that it was compatible, not to make it easy.
It was a leg at a leg, basically. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So it matches with your theory also.
Yeah.
If it's too foreign, it might be rejected.
Yeah, but also funky. Okay, got it. Cutscene. Like one can have a little moment, like just reflection, like a meta moment, like before moving to the next scene. I was thinking also trying very small scenes, but yeah, like how did that experience so far feel, or any comments, reflections?
I feel like sorry, Pablo.
No, the flow is good. I enjoy it. That's it. Yeah.
I feel like I used to be a musician in my earlier life, and maybe I still am from that experience, but I feel a bit like being thrown an instrument that you haven't played, and you just like there's nobody to tell you how to do it, so you just like hit it on some end and see what happens.
But it sort of fits. Yeah, it sort of fits with, like there's this whole. I mean, there's a lot of theories about language learning, but the kind of like throwing you into the language is one of the schools of like condensed learning, is like being completely immersed in it, and you start from there. Like of course, just as technical, but nothing prevents using something you already know about and kind of having such a topic into these scenes, and like you could play in those kind of context or starting points as well. But yeah, like it's very much it's an improvisatory. But like I think there are sort of interesting nuances in terms of like and you can quite tailor. You can tailor a lot of what is the challenge, so to speak. Like to you both, the challenge was kind of having to describe it and kind of make it to be by the description, and that being kind of the introduction. But the challenge could have been something else, and then the kind of playing the other counterpart that I was playing gives a lot of control, like the funky question and so on was kind of thought out, like maybe it's interesting to kind of make a reflection on this funkiness and so on. So that's why I made the question and so on. But now, like we could build another continuation scene. Like, so there's like, even though the scenes are sliced and kind of teleported into this is kind of after Yeah, so it's a scene on the course, and for this you can have a particular chimeric that you will be utilizing. That and this could be made out of random lists. I could give you one. I can simulate a random list, semi-random, um, uh, or you can even pick yourself. Like if, but you can choose. Do you want them semi-randomly or choose pairing of two non-fitting words or concepts or something else?
To me, we can go on with the jazz that we just had.
Meaning, like, do you want random or?
Well, not necessarily. However, I don't want to kind of. You seem to have prepared something that.
Yeah. Okay. So my preparation idea was, I'll pick one word from you, one concept from you, like that you can choose, and I'll throw the other one, like as a reaction, and that's your chimeric, and then we can start the scene.
Which is now not in the online bar anymore, but on the course. Is that what you meant? So we're changing.
Yes.
Scene.
Yeah, we could always like make a natural continuation, but I was to test many areas. I was thinking like this sort of, it's very much like film cuts, really, like
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So we're kind of in the whatever the course is. We're in the course right now.
Yeah, I will describe it further, but like before we start the scene, I can give you the chimeric, like if you choose one to, so that you can think about it before you.
Yeah, I throw you a shin bone then.
Okay. Yes.
I'll do plants.
Okay. So for plants, I will pick. Thinking. Cartoons for plants, cartoony, or maybe cartoons and a cartoon in general, like as a quality. And for shin bone, I will pick architecture. You can reject that, but that's the starting point.
So it's too visual already.
Yeah, yeah. So plant, cartoon, shin bone, architecture. So this is very serious. We're testing a structure. It's actually very structural, but in the background, but in the framework. But okay, the scene. So in the scene, you have been given this chimerics, and uh, your first task is to you're essentially on, let's say, some kind of a desk or writing or learning position. Like once again, this doesn't have to be the normal world, but you can imagine what that could be. Like it can be even different between you. One wants to get really wacky, but you have been, and you're facing this task of describe the usage of this particular chimeric, like what kind of situations it's useful and what kind of things it's capable of. That's your question. And like in a slower setting, you could actually write about this now. That would be just a different medium. But let's just have this in talking to have a more rapid approach to this. So so essentially, imagine yourself to having to describe what is it capable of, and you're making the definition for it essentially. And you're by yourself, but let's say that you actually sitting close to each other. I think we'll have a short moment of jumping in, but people will probably come off as well. Um, so let's put a pause for a moment, because I think Yeah, because I got a warning that there might be like a couple of hello, Jonathan.
Hi, sorry, I was supposed to meet Excel here.
Yeah, I think the meeting is elsewhere. The he sent me a message, then I sent him a message that we're still meeting here. So I think it's like you can ask him. I think Telegram seems to be onish, or so you can ask for where
Okay,
is it? Yeah.
no worries. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Take
no,
care,
it's
everybody.
okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Bye. Bye. Yeah. Okay. So we'll unpause. Uh, and now you got actually thinking time. So. So yeah, like I was saying, you're sitting close to each other. And so if you want to kind of even talk about it, and it's of course undefined, like how you are friends, etc., but you can play around with that, or if you're friends. Uh, but but you don't have to play with the relation. You can just tell what is the chimeric capable of.
Yeah. To me, the sort of like the way to find the right chimeric combination with two concepts requires you to try both ways, because there's like one main concept and another one that expands it, that you attach to it. So which extends the other. So it's useful to first do how does plants extend cartoon, and then how does cartoon extends plants, and see what chimeric operation makes more sense. Maybe some of them fail, maybe some of them work. So I'm thinking, when cartoon is expanded by plants, how this cartoon, this series of drawings are only existing through careful and persistent watering and sun, and their seasons, so you have to be careful how you take care of your cartoon for it to come into fruition, right? So that's my first I'm thinking of this way, and then I will come back to how how cartoons extend plants. That is my next operation.
Okay, that's a good economic answer to. Well, that's a meta comment. Okay, so you're telling this, and there is this. Let's not call it a teacher, because we can like keep it open. Maybe it defines itself what kind of person is, but it's the person you're telling it. Like maybe it's another person who is also learning it. So and they are kind of pedantic still. Like they're like on your level, but they're a little bit pedantic. Yes, I see you're using this sort of crossbreeding technique and kind of like balancing. But like there are many directions of relation, as they are mentioned, like you could mix something that they are indistinguishable, like a full mix, which is a common approach by some. But then there is like the perspective approach, which is actually that they're completely separate, but it's one looking at the other, and then the other looking at the other, which is another approach. And there are many, many approaches. But I'm sure you know what you're doing. I'm sure. I'm Meta. I made those up.
You're like backdooring there, huh? Like
maybe. Maybe. Like a Meta, I kind of made those up, and what I find interesting that it is kind of creating itself. Like you actually, Pablo, already created this sort of like an approach, and then it made me think of other approaches. Yeah. But what about you, Martin? Like, what about your shin bone architecture? What is
the
it
Shinbone,
capable
it's
of?
I mean, it's a conceptual chimera, if you so wish, which is basically a shorthand for it kind of came off of kind of a study of geometry in like for construction that was perspectivated by like stop motion technique. So like this shin bone architecture kind of derived originally from observing soccer games and making kind of taking as geometric starting points for geometric studies the arrangement of the shin bone arrangement, really kind of literally as you saw on camera, and taking basically extracting those into it's a bit of a kind of 5 obstruction kind of way of coming to structural solutions. So it's a kind of, it became its own branch of structural study that all employed this kind of movie-based stop motion and a kind of, you know.
So is it like architecture in the sense of like, are they all moving in time, or is there other way, like, you know, like stop motion moving in time? But
no, I mean, what I mean is like a freeze frame. Sorry, it's not stop motion, it's a freeze frame study. So like you begin with shin bone compositional geometry, right? And from there you can take it basically, then that was the original moment, and then basically from there you can take it into all other freeze frame kind of, you know, wrenches that you throw in the gearbox, kind of just to kind of iterate quickly over structural ideation processes, like, you see.
Okay, I think I see it. Yeah, like
it's a kind of what Frei Otto did with the kind of, you know, soap bubble architecture, out of which he made the Munich.
Okay. So the soap bubble was kind of like a pattern in some
the
way.
Soap bubble at that point would have been the thing that you would observe with the kind of, and then freeze frame, and then kind of study it as an architectural like possibility.
Yeah.
And so this is what you would do basically. Now you could think of the Herzog and de Meuron, like Beijing, is it Olympic Stadium? This kind of bird's nest. I think they post-rationalized the bird's nest onto it, because as far as I remember, that was the first kind of applied shin bone architecture, where the stop motion or the freeze frame was taken from a metro. So it was kind of already in the second stage. It was not on the soccer field as it originally was, but then it was kind of a lowly positioned camera, and people were kicking each other in the, you know, metro, and
yes,
turned out to be structurally sound. So
yeah, like maybe surprisingly, or maybe it's because of birds' nests are structurally sound. As you probably noticed, this is the same person, but they're much more friendly towards Martin. Maybe they're competing with Pablo or something.
Yeah, but they didn't get that the bird's nest was kind of post-rationalized onto it, because like shin bone stadium didn't sound very attractive.
No, yes. So
they're pedantic, but you know.
Yeah, like it's like oh, let's put a pause, because I think it's another like a momentary. Hello, Ben. Are you having a meeting with Axeli?
Oh, okay.
It's
I thought I had a meeting with Axeli. Okay.
It's in another place. Send a Telegram message to Axeli. Like, I don't know where.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
I
that
like
should
the publicness of this space here.
Yeah, it's the nature of like because like you don't really need like 2 channels or 3 channels, like mostly, but then like sometimes there are these overlaps of like, oh, sorry, I put the time there and I probably don't reach the other people, kind of a thing, and these kind of things happen.
But it really feels like a space, no? Like
yes.
like opening the door.
Knock.
Yes.
Yeah. Like so so yeah, that's why I was aware, because like I got a message just quickly like this that this flybys would happen. But pressing kind of unpause from a meta perspective, like now this could be the scene, like or like one could continue it. Um, uh, I was thinking of ending the scene with saying, okay, I guess we'll write our essays now, or our short answers now, which is not that we start writing them, but like it would almost be this sort of kind of a leaving thought towards where things could go there. But if we end the scene here, let's have a moment of reflection. Like, because the idea here was like to go a little bit on like closer by a case, and of course everything here in a spirit of a game is a challenge, but it's not a a combat challenge, or it's not even a kind of puzzle challenge in the sense what is the right answer, but the challenge is rather like more closer to what challenge is in learning, or not quite. I mean, it's more playful, but it has this sort of like you have to generate something which you're unsure of kind of thing. But like, yeah, any reflections on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I love it. I think it's very funny.
Yes.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think it's really uncomfortable and
yeah,
and very funny, and I really like this kind of having to improvise type of stuff. There's many questions that I have because, like, for example, I see like, and maybe that's just because I have certain, or that is certainly because I have certain like preconceptions about what a game is. So I see no metric, I see no, but I understand. I think I understand that the scene. I understand also this kind of really kind of creative moment that you're making something become that maybe wasn't earlier. And I have never been a role like this role playing. I have never done that once, and so I can only suppose that that's how that works. That you basically kind of
more or less, yes. Yeah,
iterate towards the universe, like jointly,
yeah.
I suppose. Yeah, and I think it's kind of what I think. I just that's a comment on you now, Pekko, if I may. Pablo, sorry for. I think I like very much that as we speak about the university, the first scene that you choose is in a bar, like acknowledging, so to speak, that like the learning environment extends, inside and outside of whatever it is we conceive to be a university. So that kind of, and I think maybe a comment to make a bit sense of that observation is that I like, coming back to your original question, how did we experience this? I like very much this kind of concrete slicing of stuff. I think that there is a very power. There's a very strong power in that. And I just, like yesterday we were here in Stadika in the swimming pool with the kids, and while they were swimming, I walked around a bit, and there was this kind of pop-up photo exhibition. And there were some photos that I found a bit interesting, so I started reading the text that was underneath it, and then the text began with its own theoretical premises and background. I was like, oh, that's so boring. Just tell me what you see, and just tell me where you are, and what is this like. I don't want to say like what is this about, but like I was kind of a bit disappointed because I thought it was, by the way, if you're wondering what I have here, I was fighting with the drill hammer and the wall. It looks maybe a bit Wolverine-ish, but
It's stylish.
it was No, so what I'm trying to say is I really like this kind of taking a chip and playing into it,
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than seeking to I think this works for me very well. I like it very much, and it's I think it's very activating.
Yeah, there were a couple of things to comment there. Like, yes, this is very much learning from role playing. But there are also differences, at least kind of like common practices. Like, for example, this level of slicing, this kind of movie-like slicing, is not typical because there's often the world. It's not completely unheard of, but it's not typical.
Yeah, because you want a narrative, right? And then in the usually
Yeah, usually, yeah, and
continuous.
yeah, and it's often kind of like one of the starting values is this very much this being in the world, and therefore like having a continuation kind of can support that feeling. And but then the second thing, which is kind of maybe here in very much in a drafty stage, but what is really interesting for me is that like there are certain kind of roads or patterns of like what is a challenge in an RPG. Of course, the common pattern in the usual games is like combat or something like fighting. But then, of course, there are other kinds of challenges, social challenges, and there's a lot of variance. But here, what I find interesting is because the kind of potential palette of those challenges is so wide, like that you can potentially kind of bring it closer to this learning, which, by the way, I think always contains a certain level of uncomfortability. Of course, you can control that a bit by the scene setup, and you can even soften the scene by kind of modifying it on the go and things like this. But like I think that's like to a moderate degree is kind of almost like a desired quality, that there is certain
Absolutely, I would think so also.
Yeah. And then I wanted to say, like, just because there's actually other loans of the potential on top of this, which are kind of like conversions, not direct loans from role-playing games and other games. And I could like quickly highlight it. Now, it's typical that people can create these things that they can call, adventures, scenarios, models, whatever. It's like, oh, I made this scenario, and it starts in this kind of environment, and there are these and these elements, and so on. And then there is another scene. They actually then expect that the game masters will kind of tie the scenes with the characters walking through them and so on. But they're often actually kind of like written in a condensed fashion. They are often these sort of main scenes in itself. So funnily enough, they are kind of actually closer to this a little bit. But we can think of it here. Like, what if you share this, that your scenario is for, say you make it for chimerics. I keep changing the pronunciation, whatever. Like, and you make this like, here's a scene one, here's a scene two. They usually one comes after the other, but you could play, here's a scene three, and so on. And once you played these scenes, you're kind of gone through the scenario or the model. But at the same time, now looking at this, like when people share these, they can also be part of a larger world. So an adventure scenario might be in a city, but that city exists in a shared reality of a world, and it's just a certain suburb of a city borough. And then that allows for others, like, oh, we are close to that city with our characters, let's go there. And then they kind of visit that scenario, or they just go there anyway.
As your friends just did, but you just threw them out.
Yes, sort of. Like they came by the street corner of the abstract reality of this. Yes, but like if one then kind of flips that around and wait a minute, like not necessarily the mecha dungeon university, but kind of this kind of a thought of sharing this kind of university in pieces. So rather than sharing courses, you can share this, and then how they turn alive is a little bit like how these games turn alive. So somebody runs them, and they're not even necessarily a teacher, or they could be, but they don't really have to be even in a teacher position, but they run them for other people. And then because they don't have right solutions, there's no problem of running them again. And there's also no problem of seeing what happened to others, when they run it, because then that might actually even help for your playing. And then you have this sort of picture of a kind of shared reality, which is actually very close to how this game world are shared and are communal. But now it has this sort of a teaching, learning tinge to it, to its play. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of, like.
But so what comes to my mind, if I may, or were you?
Sure, yes.
Yeah. Right now, whatever it is we did, we did that in the memory, in the presence, and that's in the memory of the three of us.
Yes.
And so if you speak about sharing, then two things come, or like maybe three come to mind. Like first of one way of sharing this, what just began, would have been to let one of your friends stay a bit longer and let them kind of become witness and take it together with them to another place.
Yes.
The other would be to kind of distill it in some kind of maybe written form, or kind of some kind of, you know, transmissible encoding, to which then also you might count this video.
Yeah, also potentially.
Which each have very different, you know, temporalities of kind of revisiting or like updating on it, in terms of, you know, if you want to continue the growth of this whatever mega dungeon university thing. So what just kind of sprang to my mind is like that everything basically changes as soon as you introduce this type of like if you add another materiality of memory in that way.
Yeah.
And so like this is something that interests me at this moment very much, because maybe did I say that already earlier, because like this residency program right now, it's basically memorialized by the folks who have been participating in it. There's no contract work until this point, you know, this I mean. And so this is for me very interesting, like how the how this kind of shared but okay, but this goes way meta right now. But I just like it's interesting with this sharing it.
Yeah, because like I'll come like ask you, Pablo, but just to comment on this, because I could go now very happy nerdy, but I'll just be short about this. Because if you look at how people run these worlds, adventures, etc., they don't talk about it so much, but they have an extremely complicated or sophisticated relation to time, place, etc. Like, because it's practical that somebody else can visit the scenario, so it's kind of like for that other group it kind of restarts, and that happens all the time. It's not like it's already happened, like it's kind of like can start from zero. But it can also happen that you actually play as if what happened with the other players is real, like that scenario is finished, or any kind of mix of the two, like. And so there is like in a way, like you could put it in a shorthand that it's kind of parallel worlds but parallel times at the same time. What is the approach? But then what is shared is kind of like this ingredients in a way. Like for example, if I would share this scenario, I could write like, oh, seeing this, and like there is this person who makes these questions, and the players come into that, and blah blah, and then here's scene two. And like you said, the video could be part of the material, or if other players played through it and they created something, that could also be part of the material. That's
the thing. Sorry.
Do say.
Yes, sorry, Pablo. You just kill me when you need to say. What I was just thinking is like when I watched my boys here playing like Minecraft and Fortnite and so stuff, and there was a couple like two interesting moments now. Like so the one is that I mean Minecraft is obviously or one part of it is that it's a kind of environment transforming game. So basically what you do, whatever act you take, or like is a kind of creates the inscription of that which you just did.
Yeah.
And the other thing, so that's like, then you come back and it stays that way, and then you come back and it is that way still. which I think is very funny. And then
Yeah.
the other thing is that my younger one, he has kind of not been playing Fortnite for a long time, and he just said like, now I just switched it on again after like months, and I don't know this game anymore. I have to see what's coming up, and there's now a UFO hanging in the sky, and I don't know what that does, and like I don't know the mechanics. My character looks different and so stuff, and so like what we do now is like we're not creating any material in a shared space, meaning a space outside of our own, recollection of when we switch this off, what we carry with us, that anybody else could interact with. So we're not kind of creating, except for the asynchronous video thing that you would have to kind of regather. I'm not sure what I'm saying here. It's just that like I kind of see this kind of the different material temporality of those computer games and how they leave a memory of themselves.
Like, but you're actually hitting on a very versatile point, because this is also where the kind of more pen and paper based RPGs are different. Is like if you would throw this sort of like, can things restart, or like if something happens, does it happen, or any kind of scenario, you would just answer yes. Like all of them are utilized, like all of the scenarios almost you can think of. And secondly, what could happen in those games, and people wouldn't really surprised, like let's say we play this scenario, and let's say either of you becomes like I don't know if there's professors or whatever, but something similar of chimerics. Like and then the somebody might alter the scenario that it takes. Let's say I publish this scenario that's like ingredients for somebody else to play, but then they might invite the one of you to play, and then that they could play an extra element, which is a professor of chimerics, and that those kind of things happen too. So what I'm saying here is like there is a lot of potential where like what is shared can have an ingredient like quality. It doesn't have to be a full experience. Like for example, if you played through this and you just shared your definition of a particular chimeric, then people like, oh, okay, that's cool, and they might use it or not. Or somebody might run this scenario and give one of your cases as an example before the players create their own and modify the
you couldn't, and then you cannot really avoid it anymore, because you cannot unthink that constraint that has then just been voiced.
Or they might choose not to, but that's all.
But you cannot.
But like if they also don't have to use that, but that's a possibility, because there is this sort of like sharing and publishing has this sort of ingredient like quality, in addition that it can also be like, okay, this is what happened, like this is a full-fledged reality now, like when the scenarios are shared, like they are more in this ingredient like quality. They like, yes, they describe like what persons are in a place and so on, but what is expected is that or when new players enter there, the reality is just maybe reset. But people can also play with this idea that it's actually not reset, but like what happened in an earlier game has happened, and so on. Like, and that's why the answer is yes to all of these approaches.
I think what is. May I add? Quickly?
Let's
go ahead.
Find out close your point, but like say, because you usually have good points, so you might have a good summarizing point.
Usually.
I mean, you cannot give anybody always having good points. That's just lying. Like nobody has always good points. Case in point, myself. Certainly not always good point. But yeah, you were saying, Mark.
No, what I just think is really fascinating to me, like what I was, I think, maybe pointing at right now with saying, like, as soon as you introduce what Pablo and I and you just said in the course of these tiny kind of cutscenes now, to anybody following up or like wanting to engage with that beginning Mega Dungeon University that we began now, they can't unknow that.
Yeah.
We just basically laid like a beginning ontology for what is chimerics. That just began. And so what I think, this is another thing outside and inside of this discussion that I find really interesting, is the possibility to forget, not only to memorize, but to forget too, to not know, and not for the sake of ignorance, but for the sake, maybe, I don't know, of kind of mobility, if you wish.
Yes.
And this is something that I've been thinking in many different relationships now, but in terms of forming, because we're still talking about organizations in some way, right? We're still like, I'm exploring, like, I think to be exploring organizations as much as I explore a lot of other things here. But I think
universities and organizations.
Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly, like, again, I cannot unknow if I next time think about the organization I'm seeking to shape up. I cannot unknow what we just now did now here. So, like, in a way, I am already doing that, whether it would be about Formula One or what any other thing that we would be talking about nominally. But like, what I was saying, like, what really kind of fascinates me in the same way as how to memorize is how to forget, not know, never know, or, you know, and I think the kind of synchronicity is not that same, like the kind of at the same timeness of those things and the interplay of those two things of kind of memorizing and sharing and giving forward and then forgetting. Those are, for me, highly interesting, this pair.
It's like, I'll now make the closure so we can get to Pablo, but it's really actually kind of navigation system to possible worlds, like reality. So you can say, let's forget everything. You can say, let's actually pick those parts and add them and actually remember, or them being reality, because that's interesting, or remember everything. And all of those are possible, and they become more interesting if there is no right solutions, because all of those scenarios can produce different situations, which is a kind of interesting thing at play here, which I'm thinking. So, but it's really kind of navigation tools, systems for possible worlds, because it's like it can move in time, it can move in place, it can reset certain things, it can add certain things. It's a radical possible worlds, like, existence. And the thing is, this is actually what people do already with forgotten realms or whatever, like shared RPG spaces, but it's not really talked about, and they don't really think about it. But like, if you analyze it in structure, you go, whoa, or like, this is highly cool. But Pablo,
I need to say one last thing, Pablo. I will give the, like,
I failed my course of closure.
I'm sorry. No,
No, go ahead.
It's me who's being terrible right now. I'm sorry. No, I just want, like, because I just came to this. It's also maybe a boundary of design, because you cannot. I'm not sure if you can design forgetting. I think this is a boundary of design. That's just what I wanted to say. And I think that's important for me. That's really, really, I find that very important.
I have two things to say adjacent to this discussion. One of them is that we've sort of talked about this before, like the tension between oral tradition and written tradition, and how it's very different to have a witness, if we're sharing this, that will just tell other people about it, than to share either a transmissible encoding or the video, right? And sort of like the medium of oral tradition being memory, and the fact that things are supposed to transform each time someone tells them. So I guess that's interesting. And regarding sort of like the design of forgettability, I think it would be really interesting if we look into saving mechanics in video games.
Into what?
Saving mechanics into video games, because I mean, particularly, I think the most interesting saving mechanics came from the limits of memory, right? Because right now there's this like absolute, you save everything whenever you want and that's it, right? But in the past, having this possibility of saving in different ways, and how you can choose to forget in a way. You can choose to start from a previous state and do things differently, and sort of how that plays into the game. I remember I had this awful, super hard, super difficult Batman game for the Super Nintendo, where there was no saving, and the way you would save is at the end of each level, you would get like this password, which was a combination of shapes.
Yeah, these
You
things,
would
yeah.
input this combination of shapes and then go to the starting part of that level, right?
Yeah.
I also remember this game Animal Crossing, where it was like a life simulator, so like real time was very important.
Mhm.
And you could reset the game, but then you would be greeted next time you log into the game, you would be greeted by Resetti, who was this character who was aware of you resetting the game. And even though you had resetted the game and everything was as before you had saved, this character would be angry at you for resetting because you're probably cheating in some way, right? You're probably taking advantage of resetting.
Yeah.
So this character would be conscious about this, even though the reset would be effective in a way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think saved states would be a really interesting thing to look into in sort of like the design of forgettability.
Yeah. Actually, like precisely, actually, this you pointed out. I mean, there are many others, but you really picked a really good one to look from the computer game side. Like the save game and saving a state is a whole interesting medium in itself. And like you said, like in earlier times, you have many interesting examples because you can only save certain things, but not the other things is often was a common limitation as well, like things like this. And playing with them because, like, going back to this, like, if you have like navigational systems for possible worlds, you can also kind of play with this sort of saving states because, you know, there is also this playfulness. Like you said, Martin, you cannot absolutely forget, but there is some effect of playing forgetting that like you replay the thing that you have already played is actually an interesting experience when of course players know that like I actually do it now differently, and then you use that as a kind of reflection point. It's not about like purism, it's more about like another creating another situation in itself. So like it would be an interesting uh, channel or area to explore in this connection. um, but also like the world forgetting is like, because I'm constantly thinking as this why it's and also an organizational structure is if I write that scenario and some other players come in and it resets, well, they have forgetting because it's not even forgetting because they haven't been there.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. They bring forgetting.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
I suppose that's why
The
children
world
are born.
forgets. Yeah. The world
No, I
forgets.
think so. I guess,
Yeah.
I mean, like, it would be
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. It's a nice idea that they bring forgetting. They make the world forget. Yes.
Yeah.
And like, and that kind of makes this kind of play of why it has practically come so early in this sort of role-playing scenarios, why it was almost expected that it kind of resets for all the players because like it kind of created this experience, and then actually it became later that no, let's play with this, that it doesn't always reset or doesn't reset at all, and things like this. Like there's a campaign start called West Marches Where Nothing is Forgotten, and it's a very much a community thing, and people tell stories and of each other, and there is a city where they like somewhere there is a map that they keep on drawing communally and understanding the space because but like all of these like just to say organizationally, like there is a lot of practicalities already existing sharing this kind of worlds, and that is a kind of like it's not understood as an organization in traditional sense, but it's an organizational reality. It's a form that people write web documents, like do things, is uh, create records or create this sort of representations of characters or experiences to maintain or update or modify this kind of world in itself. So if one manages to tap into this possible world-like approaches that they have, but manages to create this sort of like, here's an interesting way of sharing a challenge. It's an interesting direction to look at learning, at least. But I mean, even university in a kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also slightly punky way, maybe. Um, uh, like, the, and because it has inherently qualities of communality, it has inherently these sort of qualities of the possible worlds and so on. But yeah, but that was a good point, Pablo. Did you have others like the say?
I have many in mind, but maybe I'm thinking it would be useful to go through them more systematically, maybe in the document as a study case.
Yeah,
Just because it's really interesting, just this design for getting us a design space and how it expresses in video
yeah,
games at least.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, so maybe I mean, we're kind of on time. We could run other scenes. I have a couple, but I would actually kind of propose to visit a little bit what could be done with this. Of course, that's where we have sort of been for the last 10 minutes or so. But because like this is sort of like the evolution from this tongue-in-cheek Mega Dungeon University without having idea of it. It just sounded interesting, like not just cool, but like there was something interesting there. But like, but it kind of tapped into this like, wait a minute, there is a commonality without a leader that is maintaining a highly complex existence, so to speak, that has this sort of like very sophisticated ways of playing with time and place, as we just talked about. And but then if one comes up with this like that they're already doing challenges, and if one I mean these are kind of raw and drafty ways of turning it more into learning something. But I actually already wrote into many parts that it's kind of mixing learning and generating, which is not a bad thing for me. Like it's like now we're generating chimerics in a way, but like but being change, I think there is like I think much of learning is actually generating. It's generating yourself to a new, and what the teacher is doing is just putting you in an unusual situation so that you have to generate yourself to it. Like generate the behavior out of yourself to that situation. So there's a lot of interesting qualities, and probably can be developed further, but there's a lot like precisely coming from these kind of structures that then suggest to what is its communality and what is its communal organization, or what kind of possibilities those two things have. And that's why I think this is an interesting way of thinking, maybe even publishing a university or whatever it is. It's uh, Lyceum, Stadium, whatever. I like the tongue-in-cheekiness that it somehow challenges itself. Like this can be a place of learning, not a replacement, but an alternative vision.
Yeah. Last time you, in the session that I missed, you showed this document you're working on for exam membership, right?
Yes. Yes.
Do you think there's like overlap between the learning environment and the exam membership? Like how much learning is there in, or have you thought of in that context?
Yeah. Like so where there could be an overlap, like immediately, there might be others, but like is that there were certain kind of approaches of how to make like what would otherwise or usually be a central decision. You know, a board decides who is a new member. Those have been kind of turned into more distributed approaches. Like and uh, and why it might be useful is like if one wants to set game rules for those kind of things, they are already kind of like maybe providing some approaches towards that. Like if you want to set rules to the university, not just these scenarios kind of things. So yeah, that could be useful. There's probably something else there as well, but I haven't thought about exactly in that sense. That's why I kind of introduced it, because I thought like we're talking about a kind of university-like thing with a distributed nature. So I thought it might be interesting to think about those kind of structures, and I think that probably still applies. But yeah, like, what do you think, like, in terms of this, uh, play testing and possibility of such a like an organizational direction? I'm not proposing that it somehow becomes the central issue and everything we're doing is that. Mm, but there's also something interesting in kind of like, floating the idea kind of, and with some pieces that it can start. It might be an interesting thing to
Say again what it is you mean now.
like as a structure, this kind of call it a university or not, like it's essentially like it's a game. The scenarios would give this sort of ways of playing towards it, and then this sort of like one could add to that like ways of helping them to be in the same universe, I guess, like in this game world style. And that's an idea one could float, like, hey, this is a game possibility. This is like a here are pieces of how such a game could exist and how that could be a kind of a fairly artistic take, or at least utilizing a lot of artistic freedom of reconceiving university or learning. But it might be an interesting thing to float out, not to develop to the end point, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm catching your question exactly, but I think if I do to some extent anyway, then I could like how to say. So what we did today, right, was like a couple of first scenes of kind of like playing university, which kind of went along with kind of mirroring a bit what it is that we understand a university to be. So we begin with prejudice, or we begin with experience, or whatever it is we want to call it, and then we go and try play out. And now this, what we did not do, if I take that well, is that our actions are like Pablo's and my so to speak performance as characters in the game did not alter the way that you had conceived of these scenes. So we basically fulfilled the scenes in some way until the cut, right? So what I could think would be interesting at this stage, I'm not sure if you were talking about something a bit more kind of result oriented now, or like production oriented now, but like what could be for me interesting at this stage would be kind of to use this kind of improvisational environment or setting to play a little bit into what your role was today, basically into what is it that we conceive the university to be, or what should it be, and right.
No, like I noticed that I'm kind of in a way getting ahead of myself by thinking of structures that I know and probably not managing to or not managing to kind of communicate, because it's a lot, and it's like I'm doing a lot, like, oh, if this works, that means, and that means, and that means, and that means, but I'm kind of pulling out of like my game history experience, and this is kind of my enthusiasm, because I can see it tapping into this, like, oh, this can totally create an existence for such a university, just like these worlds exist, and people actually maintain them. and the fact that it has this sort of resetting, not resetting quality is actually exactly the same quality or array of qualities that you have in these scenarios that they run in their worlds. But they also have a sharing quality. This, like, people make these scenarios for people to reset and run again for new people in a way. Like, so I'm kind of like thinking in the sense of like how, like, which is not wasn't present in this play, is that there is this like a way of organizing this kind of play, people playing these kind of scenarios in different places into a shared reality, shared organization. But like that's of course the problem that like that's a lot of that is relying of knowing these structures better and knowing how people share these worlds in the internet, and that's probably kind of hidden now. So, but what I'm thinking is like isn't it also along the lines that you're thinking? Like, I think they're kind of having these kind of scenes, like exploring more what is the nature of a challenge in this kind of thing, when it's more about learning, and how you can create those challenges and what kind of roles you can create there, is one of the directions why I think what is interesting. Like, in addition, I think it's highly interesting that, okay, you put the scenario out there and it exists in this world. Maybe the world is even like a university, that what the map is actually kind of like departments that people create or whatever they are. And then you find in these departments this scenario. And rather than getting the already recorded or already set teacher, you run it for other people, not even as a teacher, but then they have run it as well.
But what? Sorry, Pekko, you're using now. If I'm like, you're using now kind of existing, kind of. You're referencing existing organizational structures.
Yes.
Of a university, departments, teachers, courses, and you map them onto a game mode. Yes. In some extent.
Yeah, they're like be like a game map.
Yeah, so what we did today, I thought, was that we basically began from some point, which again, as everything always starts from what one knows, or from know any prejudice one has about stuff. But we stepped into spaces which was, I thought, by design quite brilliant, that we speak about some stuff that doesn't exist, but we just make it into existence. Now, can't we, harness, is that the word? The power of that mechanic to push into a potential structure that we do not know. And give it, and kind of just see if kind of really through playing we can flesh out.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea.
You see, and
the universe is a shadow map. It's not like used with the terms. It's more like
a push-off point to me. Yeah. It's not a shadow. I thought to me it's a push-off point because we don't know any better.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting part is that we have a tool in our hands here, which is is a functional tool right now. This game mechanics to me, and we can push off of that. And we can push ourselves into a space that that might yield new organizational pattern, and then continue challenge. And another thing, quickly, just as a kind of question more maybe, the way we do this now, is this not already a shared space?
It is.
I mean, we're only 3, but we can be more at times, and
yeah, very much, yeah, and. Like, actually, Martin, we are actually in high agreement. It's just like, it's kind of communication hurdles, like how words are used. But I'm not kind of trying to enforce what is university reality. And actually, that fleshing out is precisely the point, to reconceive everything from kind of like, it's just useful material to think about, but it's not to be something to keep as it is at all. And it doesn't even, the map doesn't even have to be from a university. It might be, or university-like. It can be something completely different that fleshes out from there. But the point is to flesh it out to exist.
That's what I would kind of figure it would be, and maybe should. I mean, for me, it would also be very interesting if it were that.
Yeah. Pablo, I think I'll leave you. We can have last comments after your comments, Pablo. But
Yeah.
like I think there's another meeting starting. We're being rushed by a crowd now. There's more people than normally here. So
very briefly, I would just say this sort of like loop that we're implying. If we start from the shadow map or the university as the pushing point, we play it out, and we said stuff like course, homework, right? And but we created something.
Yes.
And what if the next step is from that something, map what organization best fit that speculation, right?
Yeah, and then
we play the next round there.
Yeah.
And we see what that develops. And after a certain amount of rounds, we will have something that is not a university, but that will continue to be a learning environment, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think this might take
productive.
plenty of iterations before we know really a structure.
Yeah. But even if you have the kind of seed of it, you have like the first growths and like that you have this picture, it already implies this thought, which then maybe other people somewhere else can take over. And people can even play in the sense that they imagine these structures like, oh, I would like to have this, and they create branches, and then they play in some of the branches. You can play in also that way.
Yeah, fork them.
Yes. But I think it's an interesting start. We can think about for the next week how we kind of digest that, and then use maybe we can always use the Telegram to kind of communicate from there. But I will promise also to kind of maybe try to express also the kind of the structural possibilities from these games and this sort of navigation systems for possible worlds kind of approach. And also, like, it's interesting to think about the scenes. Like, this was really me, like, coming up with, well, that would be an interesting challenge of generation, and that would be, but super kind of like basic in a way, like I didn't want to make them too experimental because there were many experiments going on anyway. So like, but like, you could put a very experimental challenge as well as a scene, and there's a lot of artistry possible in terms of how do you make the scene, how do you run the scene, like all of that. How do you play the scene also? But yeah, I think it's interesting, at least.
Very much.
Yeah, and it's an interesting take on, and also very applicable. We can talk about maybe it's applicable to your situation, Martin, as well, or something from this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm dwelling in it right now. It's completely there.
Yeah, let's visit that as well. But hey, thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, really great that we had this and we all made it. Therefore, thanks everyone.
Happy to be here, indeed.
Yeah.
And I press stop for the recording.